food, like life, can be complicated. That's why I'm on a quest to explore the crimes, issues, and debates that are tied to it. I hope you'll join me on my quest to explore the dark side of dining. Dirt and your gut. They're two things that don't really usually get associated, but they have a lot of very important, interesting connections. See, the health of your soil is important to the health of your gut, at least from a microbiological perspective. And that's why I've brought on today Chris Nichols, who has spent much of her life studying the different ways that soil health contributes to our gut health. So here is our full, unedited conversation. I hope you enjoy. All right. Hello, and welcome to the Dark Side of Dining. Today we have with us Chris Nichols, who is here to talk to us about microbiomes and how that relates to our food and health. So would you please introduce yourself? Kind of what it is that you do and how did you get working in the world of food?
Yes, thank you so much for having me. And it's great to be here and talking with you about the soil microbiome as well as the gut microbiome and how these things are interacting. I was born and raised on a farm, grew up in agriculture, and agriculture is food. So that's my first connection with the world of food. And in growing up on a farm, talking about food we are producing, seeing those things happening. And then when I went to university, I started research in soil microbiology, specifically arbuscular mycorrhizal fungi, which are a obligate symbiote. It's a relationship that most plants have. About 90 to 95% of the plants in the world are associated with mycorrhizal fungi, and most of that with arbuscular mycorrhizal fungi. And what these fungi do is they grow into the roots of the plant and right through the cell wall to the cell membrane. And that allows for a very efficient exchange of nutrients that they acquire out in the soil along with water, and they can deliver that right into the plant cells. And then the plant will provide them with photosynthesis, with carbon from photosynthate, I should say. So that food going to the microbe, it's sort of, I think of it as basically part of the carbon economy that runs our world, is that you get the plant paying for the nutrients from the mycorrhizal fungi. And the mycorrhizal fungi, I think of them kind of like the best Amazon you could possibly have, because they deliver the nutrients, and the plant can order up whatever the plant wants, whether it's copper or molybdenum or nitrogen or phosphorus or any nutrient the plant wants. The plant can order that up, and the mycorrhizal fungi will work with the consortia of the soil microbiome to deliver that right to the front door, right to the cell wall. So again, that's kind of the Amazon analogy that I like to use with it, because it's one of those things you can create those orders, and you can do the order anytime you want to do it. The plant can order, at 3 a.m. or it can order at 3 p.m. So it's one of those things that has excited me when I first started. So as a sophomore, as an undergrad, I started working in a laboratory on arbuscular mycorrhizal fungi, and kind of continued that through graduate school, and started looking more deeply at how this relationship is going to exist, and how it really enhances that delivery and the efficiency of the delivery of nutrients and supports that carbon economy. And then I started working more directly with some innovative farmers and ranchers in North Dakota and throughout the northern Great Plains up into Canada, and just kind of grew from there to where I talk with some farmers throughout the world, and have the opportunity to really try and get this information out there on how we can really access the soil microbiome. And then the more that I was looking at the soil microbiome, the more that it started to connect what was happening in our gut microbiome, and how many of these processes are very similar with what the consortium of organisms are doing to what the gut microbiome does in our bodies, as well as the gut and rumen microbiomes in other animals.
Interesting. So there's these parallels between soil and the gut microbiome. So what fundamental things link these biomes? 'Cause, I mean, it seems pretty far cry. My gut versus the dirt my food is growing in, right?
Mm-hmm.
So what's kind of the connection there?
Yeah. As I said, the soil microbiome is helping the plant to get the nutrients that the plant needs and doing that very efficiently, trying to access whatever the plant needs um, very quickly and delivering it to a place where it can be readily absorbed by the plant. The gut microbiome is doing the same thing. These primarily bacteria, fungi, some protozoa. In the soil microbiome, it is bacteria and fungi and some protozoa as well that are going to be doing this. And in our guts, what they're doing, so there's a lot of similarities in some of the biochemistry and the processes, but in our gut, um, they're breaking down the more complex biomolecules that are in our food that are formed by the plant and or the animals that are consuming those plants. So depending on, what it is that we're eating, but they're more complex biomolecules, but then they're breaking those down into the elements that need to go into our bloodstream. And in the soil, they're doing some similar things, breaking down organic matter. So that's the food. So basically plant leaves, root exudates, animal debris, other dead living organisms, all of those things that are complex biomolecules that they're going to break down into those essential elements. So it's the cycle of in the soil breaking down more complex biomolecules into the essential elements that then can go into the plants, and then the plants help to transform them into complex biomolecules that then go into our food, and then the gut microbiome will break those down. And in some cases, there's really strong parallels. So being able to help to stimulate the growth of some plants, some microbes, in addition to providing nutrients directly, will help to break down the seed coating and help to break down some of the carbohydrates that are in the seed in order to be able to provide the elements and the nutrients. So it's basically they use that instead of it being directly the photosynthate that the plant is fixing, they're actually going to use the sugars and complex carbohydrates that are in the seed and break those down and use that as their carbon source. Just like the photosynthate was the carbon source for the mycorrhizal fungi, the organisms that are breaking down the seed are going to use that to break down. They're going to use that carbon in the seed as their carbon source to then produce the enzymes to help to provide the nutrients to that growing plant before it's even starting photosynthesis. And again, for some seeds, you actually need the microbes to break through the seed coat before the seed will even germinate. So there are ways in which that works. And again, in a similar way in our body, depending on what it is that we're eating, the gut microbiome, you have different microbes that are going to be able to process different things. And again, kind of going along with this, one big example is gluten, because the seed contains what is really good about the seeds of wheat or some of the ancient grains, emmer and spelt, and some of the older varieties of wheat that are part of our food system that we found people who have a gluten intolerance can eat some of these ancient grains as opposed to having to eat the modern varieties of wheat. And the reason that is because in the seed, in the germ of the seed, there are precursors that the soil microbiome can use to help to break down, to make the enzymes to break down gluten. And the same thing exists in when we're making the flour. There should be some precursors in there that can help to stimulate your gut microbiome to make the enzymes to break down gluten. And so in modern varieties, and this is sort of part of the dark side of dining, is in modern varieties, we have reduced the concentrations of those precursors that allow for that breakdown. Um, so naturally, this is the way it's supposed to go in the soil microbiome. The soil microbiome says this is the way it's supposed to happen. And then the gut microbiome, just because of the way that we're growing our food, uh, doesn't have access to do those same jobs.
Interesting. So it sounds like without a healthy microbiome, both in the soil and in our cells, in our stomachs and whatnot, we don't get the nutritional value for our food, right?
Yeah, we don't get the nutritional value. The plants can't form some of the antioxidants and polyphenolics that we should get from our food. Some of the vitamins that we should get from our food, they're either made directly or indirectly by the soil microbiome. And then the gut microbiome is able to utilize those nutrients. So we really can't live without the gut microbiome, and we really can't live without the soil microbiome.
Okay, so what's kind of harming these microbiomes, causing problems like gluten intolerance and things like that?
Well, what is happening is that uh, everything is part of this carbon economy, and the carbon economy is food. It's carbon, the element that's in all of it's the backbone of every cell, every molecule in every living organism. I should say almost every living organism. Diatoms have a silica-based body structure, but all other organisms have a carbon-based body structure, and all of the enzymes, all of the molecules in our bodies have carbon as part of that basis. And that carbon is coming directly or indirectly from photosynthesis. And so the soil microbiome is basically trying to help to increase photosynthetic rates and provide enough elements, excuse me, sorry, is trying to provide enough elements to essentially create all of the enzymes that are needed to do photosynthesis and accelerate that process. And in exchange, they get part of the photosynthate. If they don't get part of the photosynthate, if they don't get sugars or carbon from the plant, if they don't get paid, they can't do their jobs. So the carbon economy is them getting paid. If they don't get paid, they can't do their jobs. And when they don't do their jobs, the plant doesn't have a lot of the more micronutrients, the nutrients that aren't very readily available to do things like photosynthesis, but also to do other complex processes and to make the antioxidants, polyphenolics, the vitamins, all of the things that we're looking for from our food. So what ends up happening is when we add a lot of what we think is the best fertilizers to the soil to grow our crops, to the plant, that fertilizer is basically free to it. So the plant isn't going to pay carbon to the microbiome if it doesn't need to. And we don't always add all of the nutrients that the plant needs to grow in our fertilizers, but we add the ones that are usually needed in higher concentrations. So the plant and the soil microbiome, basically we've cut off that relationship. We've cut off that economy, or we've slowed it down to the rate that it's just sort of a trickle. And that doesn't support the complexities that are needed to get all of these micronutrients from the soil. So when we add fertilizer, we basically outsource the jobs of the soil microbiome. And if you think of any community in which jobs have been outsourced, that community slowly starts to collapse, and people who initially did the main jobs that got outsourced are going to leave. And so what we see in the soil microbiome is that same thing happening, that the communities have become far less diverse. It's far harder, again, than without those diverse communities to have the consortia activities that are needed to get those micronutrients in the quantities that are needed when the plant needs them. So now the plants can't form a lot of those more complex biomolecules that should go into the grains. And the plants were originally designed to not produce a large amount of progeny. Basically, they don't want to produce a large amount of grain because reproduction takes a lot of work. Every organism doesn't want to have a lot of progeny. The only exception are sort of early successional weedy species, and they do that because they produce a lot of seeds to try and colonize the land very, very quickly in order to be able to regenerate and restore it by adding carbon back into the environment and building soil. So what ends up happening is that, one, we've cut off that fertility flow because we've added synthetic fertilizers. And then the other thing that ends up happening is because we've demanded the plant to produce such high yields, so much grain, so much biomass, depending on what part of the plant you're eating, we're driving the plant to actually put more energy into building that part. And when that part of the plant is what's driven to be made, less carbon then is available to go to the soil microbiome. So even if we took the fertility out of the equation, our demand for high yield or high biomass is reducing the amount of photosynthate that could go below ground. Essentially, ideally, the plant should put roughly about 70 to 80% of their carbon below ground and less of it above ground into the leaf tissue and into the seeds that it's making. And we've essentially inverted that in the way that we have bred for and selected for varieties that are going to be higher yielding. So we've got to figure out a way to balance those, because obviously we need to have food. We have over 8 million people and our population is continuing to grow. So we need to have food, but we need to have a way to balance that. And so when the plant is driven to just make a whole lot of progeny or a whole lot of biomass, what it does is that biomass is primarily, in order to have that volume, it's basically the plant will stuff it with carbohydrates, because that's the thing that's made first from photosynthesis is sugars and carbohydrates. And so it's the easiest, fastest thing the plant can make. And the more complex biomolecules like the antioxidants, polyphenolics, vitamins, all of those things we want from our food need micronutrients. Their structure is more complex than a carbohydrate. It takes more energy and more carbon resources to make them. And so if you're required to grow really, really fast, the thing that you get fed if you need to grow really, really fast is carbohydrates. And then that doesn't make you very healthy. We look at that in ourselves. We eat a lot of carbohydrates and you may grow really fast, but that doesn't make you very healthy because you're not getting everything that you need. The plant does the same thing. Instead of making every seed have all of the resources it would need to survive, now the plant is saying, I'm going to make a whole bunch of seeds. I'm going to put in what I have in abundance, which is carbohydrates. And if a few of them survive, that's good, because, the odds are, instead of making, 10 seeds and having one of them be the best seed on the planet, I now have to make 1,000 seeds. Well, I only need, again, that 1% to be, or that 10% to be the best seeds on the planet. And so, That's the biggest issue too that we run into in demanding high yield is we're basically reducing the amount of nutrients that we're getting. Um, and then, what that does is our gut microbiome now doesn't have the resources that it needs. So we've found that there's more nerve cells in your digestive system than there are in your brain. And they have to respond to what the gut microbiome is saying. So the gut microbiome is starving because it doesn't have all of the resources that it needs. So it basically sends the signal to those nerve cells that say, I'm hungry. You got to feed me. And so we're finding that we're eating more, and obesity and malnutrition are essentially in the Western world, they're twin disorders. Because we're malnourished, we are obese human beings because the gut microbiome says, I'm starving, feed me. We eat more, but our food doesn't have the nutrients. So we're malnourished, but we eat more, but we're malnourished. And it's just this vicious cycle that's going on when we have disconnected the ability of the soil microbiome to provide the nutrients to the plant to make sure that the food has that highest density of nutrients in it.
Huh. So then what are the solutions, right? But where are the kind of where's the thought right now on how to kind of fix this?
So the thought right now, there are several things that we can do, and it's starting with how can we work with farmers and ranchers and support farmers and ranchers that are going to be trying to optimize the efficiencies of that carbon economy, getting that carbon to flow below ground, which means that, in the cases of the plants, they're going to, one, want to reduce the amount of nutrients, amount of fertilizers that they're adding. So the plants become more dependent on the soil microbiome. And it isn't just about reducing those nutrients, but also adding them at the right times. So we can look at the physiology of the plant and determine when it needs its highest input of fertilizers. A lot of times we will just add fertility when it's convenient for the farmers and ranchers. So what ends up happening is, one of the analogies I use is basically you're going to have a child and you sat down and calculated how much it was going to cost to feed that child, how much food you would need to feed that child for 18 years. And you went out to the big box store and you bought all of that food when it was on sale so that you had everything you needed to feed that child for 18 years. And when the child was born, you put all of that stuff in the nursery and in the crib and around the kid and the baby, and you basically then come back 18 years later and open up the door and think that you're going to have a productive member of society. That's not going to happen. And I know that it's not exactly the same because it's years versus days in a season, but we treat our plants the same way, our crop plants. We give them high amounts of fertility, oftentimes in the fall, because of logistics and other circumstances. We'll add a lot of fertility into our soils in the fall or in the early spring, in many cases before we've implanted the seed. So before the child's born, we put everything in the nursery and then we think that that's going to be okay. So what we want to do is figure out, okay, how can we be able to time when the plant needs it? Because the other thing, just like putting the food in the nursery, that food is not going to be edible for 18 years. The nutrients that we add, the fertilizers that we add, many of them will become unavailable, or they will leach out of the soil or run off of the soil and contaminate our waters, which is a problem we end up in our lakes and rivers and streams. and in the oceans with eutrophication and other issues like that because of the inputs of those fertilizers that we added at the wrong time. So if we were to optimize adding the fertilizers at the right time, one, the microbiome can get fed, especially at the start, at those initial phases, start working with the plants. And then when the plants have a higher demand, a little bit of extra fertility is added to the system so that we could still maintain the high levels of productivity that we need to feed people. And at the same time, because the microbiome has been working, those micronutrients that the plant needs that the fertility doesn't give them are going to be provided to the plant because those microbes are going to be active and growing. So thinking about how we can enhance this economy of carbon flows from the plant to the microbiome and keeping that going is going to be a way for the plants to be able to still have a highly productive but more nutrient-dense food. And so everything we talk about principles of soil health, and we'll talk about things like reducing tillage or soil disturbance. And reducing soil disturbance is an important part of maintaining the soil microbiome because it can help to maintain those carbon flows to the soil microbiome by not moving the microbes so far away from the plant roots. So basically, I think of this oftentimes like, you live in New York City, say, and the microbes that are going to provide the food for New York City live in St. Louis. And so when you do tillage, you've moved all of the microbes to St. Louis. But when you don't do tillage, you could leave microbes in New York City because you're not moving them away from where the roots would be growing. So you don't have to have that long transport to provide all of the food to New York City. So we want to do that by reducing tillage. Reducing tillage, when we do tillage, we also lose a large concentration of organic matter that's in the soil. It's part of the food source that's feeding some of the microbes. Again, they feed directly or indirectly off of photosynthesis. Indirectly is when they're feeding off of dead material that's in the soil that's part of the soil structure. And when we do tillage, we will lose a lot of that organic matter very quickly because there are microbes on the surface of the soil that break that down. They're basically a friend of mine, Don Rakowski, with USDA or he was with USDA in Morris, Minnesota, referred to them as piranha microorganisms. And it's basically they eat very, very quickly, and all they do is eat and give off CO2. And they do that so that we're not buried in trash. If you think about it, how much garbage we accumulate in one day. If we didn't have microbes in our environment that could break that down, we would be buried in trash in less than a week. Just think about the garbage that you have. If it just sat around you, you'd be buried in it very quickly. The microbes are an important part of being able to break that down. When we do tillage, we basically expose organic matter that was buried in the soil to the surface to those piranhas that break it down very quickly. We also, because at the surface, we're going to break down some of the structure of the soil with tillage. Now we're going to increase erosion. And in the United States alone, we lose about 1.7 billion, with a B, metric tons of topsoil every year. Just to visualize how much soil that is, if you were to load that soil onto boxcars and you put 100 tons in each boxcar, which is basically about the maximum they can hold, you put 100 tons of soil in each boxcar. Sorry, I should clarify, they're metric tons. So 100 tons of metric topsoil in each car, the length of the train would circle the equator more than 7 times. Every year, in the United States alone. That's how much topsoil that we lose. And then we spend millions of dollars cleaning that out of our waterways. We have to dredge river deltas. We have to dredge river channels because of that topsoil that we've lost. And that topsoil, again, contains nutrients. It contains carbon. It contains organic matter. All of the things that are needed by that system is what it is that we're losing. So, reducing tillage is a big component. Increasing diversity because we want to have these more complex consortia of microorganisms. They need different types of food, which is coming from different types of plants and other things that are feeding off of different types of plants. So the more that we can increase diversity, not only is that good for the soil microbiome, but it's also good for us. In much of our monoculture-based agriculture, I think of this as sort of the donut diet. We're basically feeding the soil donuts. We're feeding the soil one type of carbohydrates because we have a monoculture. And yeah, organisms could live off of those donuts, but not very many of them will live for very long off of just donuts. We like the donut diet. I get excited. I like donuts. We think that that's a great thing, but we can't exist, and the soil microbiome can't exist, and our gut microbiome can't exist off of the donut diet. So the more diversity that we have in the system, the better off we're going to be. And it enhances diversity at so many levels, not just in the soil microbiome, but in the macroscopic organisms, in the bats and the bees and the birds and other animals that'll be a part of the system that are helping that system to function. So, that's something that we think a lot about with helping to enhance. And a lot of these farmers and ranchers that are looking at regenerative agriculture are reducing their soil disturbance, they're increasing the diversity, they're reducing their inputs or managing their inputs for the right time. They'll be doing things with helping to protect the soil surface by providing armor crop residue or cover crops, other things like that protect that soil surface. The soil surface is sort of like the surface of our skin. And, when we don't have that armor on it, it's us going outside naked every day of the year, whether it's cold or hot, or, we don't have sunscreen, we don't have clothing, we're just out there naked. And it destroys our skin cells. It'll destroy the surface of the soil so that that exposure is something we want to protect from. And then we talk some about things like integrating animals into the system, which integrating animals can be a grazing animal, but it also is looking at how we might be able to, again, add some diversity that could come from things like birds and bats and bees and predatory insects that are going to reduce the populations of disease insects, other animals, wildlife, everything that we have can be a part of integration and helping to enhance the activities of the plants and what's going to be happening with those plants in that system.
Interesting. So it sounds like there's a lot of solutions for on the end of like the farmers, right?
Uh-huh.
But what about for example, our listeners, who majority of which are not going to be farmers? What can we do to support a food system that prioritizes this microbial health for our soil, which then it turns into good health for ourselves?
Yes. So one, there's a lot that we can do. I said supporting farmers and ranchers, and that goes to supporting when you are making food choices, supporting food that is either going to be coming from a farmer or a rancher that you may know or that you know of or have investigated. There's a lot of information that's available on the internet. It's a wonderful tool for us to be able to learn about what's happening. So we can learn about some of these farmers and ranchers and some of the groups that they have created, the coalitions that they have created in order to be able to provide that food. So again, looking at what it is that we're making our food choices with, reading labels, just a lot of the things that we're sort of taught to do, what we should be doing when we go to the supermarket, reading labels, finding out what actually is in our food. And that it goes to, looking at what is added as various types of preservatives. So I recently moved back to the United States. I lived in Canada for a while, and one of the issues that I have in the United States is when we look at, especially a lot of our dairy products, when it is that we start to remove fat from some of our dairy products, we actually will add sugar. So reading the label, even when you go and you buy a gallon of milk, is it, milk? And then, like I said, what are some of, and not just, what are some of the preservatives? Because some of the ways that they get away with adding some of the sugars many of the sugars are considered to be preservatives. So you'll find things that will be, they've got citrate or dextrose or, and all of those essentially are sugars. To the gut microbiome, they're primarily sugars. So how your gut microbiome processes them, again, the gut microbiome takes that and says, I'm starving because there's nothing in there that has good value for me. So again, reading labels is something that we as consumers can do in making those food choices. Trying to expand our diet, again, adding more diverse food stuff, changing some of the things from the types of breads and pastas that we eat, not just having them be wheat-based, but also having them be legume-based, things like chickpea flours, and that there's chickpea pizza flour. The pizza's got made out of chickpeas. We have a lot of different types of legume-based pastas that you can have that are things that are chickpeas and lentils. You can also be utilizing some of these other grains, spelt and emmer and kernza and quinoa, a number of different things that we could start selecting in the diversity of our diet. And again, in the United States, some of this can also be talking with some of our friends and neighbors, especially that have some different cultural backgrounds, because they'll have some other food types that they're eating. And that's going to be something where you're going to say, okay, how could I incorporate this into my diet? What are these other things that I might be able to do? So really, again, trying to expand our palate and being able to look and make those choices. Again, when we're selecting juices or we're selecting canned goods, all of those types of things, trying to find things that are 100% juice or that are, reading those labels and understanding a little bit, learning a little bit about what sugars are and what sugars aren't. And, again, when it comes to like 100% fruit juice, a lot of people don't like it because they look at the sugar concentration. The sugar concentration is really high, but the sugar concentration is fructose sugar, which is a better sugar for us than citrate or dextrose or glucose types of, or sucrose-based sugars. All of those sugars, 6 carbon sugars. So educating ourselves, again, about the difference between fat and sugar, and all of that goes to, the different types of elements that we might have in our food, making those choices. And really also, we are citizens, part of a social contract. Farmers and ranchers provide the most important thing for us. They provide our food. And we need to, as active citizens, be working on supporting them. So, talking about various types of policies or programs. I mentioned issues with erosion and eutrophication and contamination in our water. utilizing that as mechanisms to help to support farmers and ranchers that are doing the right things and getting more policies and programs to be able to support those farmers and ranchers, creating those dialogues and creating the understanding. And so I think, a big part of this is educating ourselves and being active citizens. And that's something that we can all do.
Love it. So it just sounds like it all boils down to connectedness, right? How connected we are with where our food comes from, the people who make it, what's in it, all of that. It just sounds like that's kind of the core message here is we need to connect with it to understand better and be better in our health.
Exactly. The interconnectedness of all of this. I think of us as sort of these organisms that we're all connected in a and going back to the fungi, their bodies are these fine threads, and it's all like we're all involved in this huge hyphal network, which is, below ground, or mycelial network below ground. We think of it, sometimes it's referred to as the below ground World Wide Web. That isn't just what's happening below ground, but it's what's happening above ground. And, being able to really support that level of interconnectedness, I think is really key, and looking to see what might be happening from that interconnected standpoint in order for us to really see how different organisms are working together. So I like that, and, keep it going.
Yeah. Awesome. Well, just kind of finishing up here, where can our audience learn more about your work and other information on, how we can help?
Yeah. So I am. I have various sites on social media. I'm on Facebook and LinkedIn, so you can just look for Chris Nichols, and agriculture is probably, because there are a lot of Chris's out there, and Nichols isn't necessarily the most uncommon name, but it's a Chris with a K, and agriculture or soil. And I also am working on a book that hopefully will be out in, well, working on a book means that it'll probably be about a year, but hopefully, get that information out there, trying to post things on YouTube and other sources of social media to get that information, reaching out with soil health coalitions and soil conservation groups that exist, farmer groups and organizations. So not just for me, but for learning about some of this information. There are some really good books out there too to get some information out of. David Montgomery has written a series of books. First one is called Dirt, but one called The Growing Revolution. Others are focusing on one in particular that your audience may like is What Your Food Ate, is what it's called, because it's talking about that soil microbiome and what gets into our food. And a number of other people who've been writing books that are talking about this and being able to get that information. So again, I think on some level, the dark side of dining and some of what we talked about seems very dark and very sad, and not really sure what it is that we can do. But like I said, I think right now what I like to talk with farmers and ranchers about is we have almost limitless options and opportunities ahead of us. So let's see how we could tap into some of those options and opportunities that work the best for us. I know everyone is struggling as far as finances and, making food choices. People will be like, well, but I can't choose this because I can't afford to choose that. That's where, like I said, it isn't necessarily, it'd be great if, you had your local farmer that you could go to their farm and buy their food from, but the majority of us can't do that and don't have access to that. And so, what are some things that we can do to help to educate ourselves and support things as citizens? And again, I think reading labels and having an understanding of what our food really is. Just sort of another note of that. There have been surveys out there that have shown that 8% of Americans think that chocolate milk comes from brown cows. There are a lot of people who don't know that chocolate actually comes from trees. Learning again where our food comes from isn't just learning about the farmers and ranchers, it's learning where our food comes from. There are also surveys out there where you have more people who will gravitate to things like non-GMO than will gravitate to things like organic, because non-GMO means nothing bad to someone. But what people don't understand is non-GMO doesn't mean that you're not using pesticides and synthetic fertilizers and all of these other things. I mean, there are some farmers who grow non-GMO crops who don't use those things, but that's not what those words mean. So investigating too, in the labels that we have, what those labels actually mean. Again, the label fresh means absolutely nothing. The label local can mean absolutely nothing. Was talking to a grocer in a town in North Dakota, and they were talking about they had local foods, and the grocer was asked, well, what does that mean? And they were like, well, it gets shipped to me on a truck that says that it's local. And, again, it's not their fault. I'm not trying to blame them. It is the way that a lot of our infrastructure for our food system is. But I think if we educate ourselves and have that knowledge and share that knowledge with others, that's going to help us to be making those choices where we don't have to buy all organic. We don't have to buy all that's labeled regenerative or those types of things. You don't have to pay more. You just have to ask yourself, why am I buying skim milk that has a whole bunch of sugar added to it? Can I make a different choice? And, it's the same price for whole milk as it is for skim milk. So it's just, we're making a different choice, and making those choices, I think, is an important part of what it is that we need to do, educating ourselves. So I'm grateful for programs like this, where we are trying to work to educate the public.
Yeah. Well, awesome. Thank you so much for your insights and your time. We'll be sure to include some links to your work and some of these resources you mentioned. So thank you so much.
Thank you.
The Dark Side of Dining is a production of Food for Thought Audio. This episode was written, produced, and edited by me, Kenny Mears. I'd like to thank today's guest, Chris Nichols, for sharing her insights and thoughts with us. For more information on Chris and her work, go check out the links in the description. If you enjoy The Dark Side of Dining, please be sure to follow us on Facebook, YouTube, Instagram, or wherever you listen to your podcasts for more content. And be sure to share it with your friends and family. And thank you, as always, for your comments. We read them all, and thanks for listening. If you enjoy The Dark Side of Dining, you might just enjoy our other two shows on the Food for Thought Audio Network, Games 105 and The Story Arc. Games 105 is a brand new show with 4 college students as they dive into video games, the lore, the game mechanics, and all the other nitty-gritty details that gamers absolutely love. And The Story Arc is a weekly podcast where we bring on storytellers to tell the stories that mean something to them. And we add a little bit of pizzazz, some sound effects, some music as we see fit. So go check out The Story Arc wherever you listen. Links in the description.